Thank you very much.
To the panel and my opportunity to introduce Professor Narendra, who is our assistant professor, sorry, in the Transport Institute and the Supply Chain Management, who is got double duty, chairing at the end of that session and is now chairing the next one. So Narendra, I'll turn the floor to you.
All right, thank you, Barry. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session on Northern Transportation and Economic Development. I think we're going to have a few interesting presentations lined up for you today. So without any delays, I'm going to introduce our next presenter, who is Randy Jenkins. So Randy has over 25 years of experience in the federal government, working largely on indigenous rights and indigenous programming. Having joined the Nutrition Northern program in 2019, Randy has been responsible for program in transformation, introducing a number of measures beyond the traditional subsidy offering, while moving the entire program toward food security focus, recognizing and leveraging treaty and inherent indigenous rights. Randy recently retired from the Northern Affairs to take up a position as the CEO of, sorry, I'm not going to pronounce it correct, but please correct me, Randy, Wichi Weomegun Buying Alliance, a nonprofit supplying food and equipment to remote communities in partnership with food banks. Randy, over to you.
Thank you. Barry has asked me to speak about the Winter Road Network, and I'd like, as in my introduction, I've worked a number of years in Nutrition North Canada, where winter roads were actually a quite important part of our delivery network. So when you think about a winter road, people typically call them ice roads, but they're actually very little of the road is ice. Winter roads are dependent on sort of three elements. Number one is the temperature. Number two is the precipitation. And number three is actually the insurance that insures the trucks that drive on these roads. The road itself, a lot of these roads go quite a distance across land. If I speak to the one going to Island Lake, it's about 300 kilometers long. It takes about 7.5 hours to drive it. Most of it is over land, and it's over muskeg. So the muskeg has to be frozen before you can put the winter road in. But the road itself is actually paved in snow. And in some sections of the road, the snow is piled up to quite a depth, probably about 13 feet. Because the road goes over top of beaver dams and across ponds and streams that when they're exposed are actually quite far down. So the way the winter road is built is it starts with snow machines. So typically in the community building its own winter road, they will take snow machines out along the cleared path to the next roaded community. Those snow machines are used to pack down the snow. And when the snow gets compressed enough, they can start to bring larger and larger machinery onto the road to start to fill in, like I said, the beaver ponds and things like that. These roads are not, I mean, I love driving a winter road, but I would not want to drive a winter load with a fuel truck. That to me would be a fairly big nightmare. They're not smooth roads. They're very bumpy. There are not the typical grading and things like that that's done on other gravel roads. Doesn't exist. The hills are interesting. There's one hill going in the Island Lake Winter Road that's a sharp hairpin turn at the top of a quite a steep little embankment, and I really have no idea how they get a fuel truck in that, especially not a semi, but they do every year. A lot of the communities are really highly dependent on these winter roads. When the winter road is open, that's where you get all the fuel for the community. And remember, a lot of these communities are not on the electrical grid. Some of them still burn diesel as a diesel generation. So that has to be brought in on the winter road in the winter time. And enough fuel has to be stored in the community to last the entire year. If I think the Big Trout Lake in Ontario, the price of gas for your truck in the winter will be $3 a liter. By the time August rolls around, it's at $7 a liter. And you think a lot of their food supply comes from fishing, from hunting, from on the land activities. This fuel cost is just insane. But they manage it. And without that winter road, that automatically triples any of the costs. You fuel cost, whatever is coming into the community, if that has to be flown in, the costs are just astronomical. The last 10 years or so, the winter road network has become unstable. There are years when it gets cold enough, but it doesn't snow. There are years when there's lots of snow, but it's not cold enough to freeze the muskeg, and it's not cold enough to freeze the lakes. The winter road season tends to be getting shorter constantly. And there's a new problem that's actually arisen. If you look at the Northwest Territories, which a lot of the communities are highly dependent on the Mackenzie River. The barge system goes up the Mackenzie River to deliver food and goods to the community. This year, the river was too low. So not only could they not get the barges up the river, but none of the ferries were working. So even trucking materials into these communities wasn't possible. The Northwest Territories itself, if I speak to their lands people, they've lost well over 1,000 lakes in the last 10 years simply because the permafrost is thawing underneath them and the lake just disappears. It goes into the right into the tundra. There is a serious climate situation going on, and I don't think we're all really aware of the impact of this. If that winter road network goes down, some of these communities are not going to be livable. And that's going to lead to a huge problem in terms of Indigenous rights, in terms of people who have grown up there. Their entire 1,000-year history of their family is dependent on that community. The trauma in terms of losing a community is going to be quite significant. The concern I have is that, we keep talking about climate change and we keep investing in measurement of climate change, but we've never really done anything for climate change. In my estimation, we're probably 5 years behind where we need to be if we're going to start putting mitigation measures in some of these communities. You think about, if we need to build a bridge, the bridge spans need to go in on a winter road, and where there's no winter road, they don't go. The way the government funding cycle works, it generally about 10 years to get a project like that from initiation to reality. That's why I say right now we're about 5 years too late. The other big component of the winter road equation is the insurance companies. Winter road dies not when there's not enough snow, or not when the ice doesn't freeze. It's when an insurance company won't insure the trucks to travel that road. And the insurance companies are becoming more and more stringent, and the insurance costs are rising quite significantly to get into these communities. So that's, sort of my major concern is, number one, we're getting less precipitation than we used to get. The climate is warming, so we're not getting as much freezing as we used to get, and the winter road seasons are getting shorter and shorter. And number three, the insurance companies will likely withdraw 5 years before the ice stops freezing. So that does become a significant problem. In terms of other delivery to the north, like the sea lift season, the climate change also impacts sea lift. When the sea ice blows into the harbors, they can't get in. If the harbor freezes, they can't get in, and if the water goes, the water levels increase. A lot of the sea lift is dependent on running across the mud flats to the community. I don't know if you've ever seen a sea lift operation, but if you go to the NEAS sea lift website, they can show you what happens. Effectively, the ship pulls into the harbor. The cranes take the cargo doors off the ship, which are actually large rafts. They put them into the water. They then unload a tugboat. They then unload 2 loaders that go onto these rafts. One is 80 tons, one is 120 tons. And they push these into shore where the loaders go on the shore. The barge goes back to the ship and the goods start to be brought off the ship. And then the loaders will take them from the raft into the shore, running usually quite a distance across the beach or the mud flat. And that's how it's done. And that's how it's done in most of northern Canada. And if the water is too high for the loaders but too shallow for the barge to get close, then there's a problem. And so, in terms of climate change and delivering to these communities, the danger is quite significant. Just to mention that I'm now CEO of a not-for-profit corporation called Wet'suwet'en. This corporation is actually an offshoot of an alliance that was created, and a treaty was actually signed almost exactly a year ago in Winnipeg. And it's a treaty that puts together the food banks, national food banks. Volker is part of this, Harvest Manitoba, and Feed Ontario. They're all part of this sort of coalition that we put together along with 6 tribal councils. And what we do is work on, logistics and different alternatives to get food into these communities, starting with number 1, the free food from the food banks. Now that Wet'suwet'en has been created as a not-for-profit, we'll be moving on to the low-cost food. So what we do is leverage our food bank partners to purchase food from the grocery network and get it shipped into the communities. And then number 3, we're currently negotiating with a large grocery chain to get access to wholesale pricing and directly to their suppliers. So we eliminate that shelving fee that we're worried about, and we ship directly to the communities like that. We're looking at using the Winter Road Network, but we're also looking at partnerships with airlines. For example, I just spoke to Buffalo Airways the other day, and we're looking at running out of Thompson, Manitoba, where we've purchased a large distribution center, actually from Sobeys. And that led us to the Sobeys partnership, of course. So we've got this going on. This has been created by the communities for the communities. The food banks are critical partners in this effort. And it's just, we're going to try something different. We're going to see what happens when you take the greed and the profit motive out of the middle of the equation, and see where we can get in the communities in terms of lowering food prices. Okay, any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Go ahead, Judy.
I missed your name. I had to take a work call.
My name is Randy Jenkins.
Randy Jenkins.
I was a former policy manager at Nutrition North Canada.
Okay. Yes, a policy that only benefited one store.
It's more complicated than that, but
Yeah, yeah, I understand. But I'm really glad to learn of the Sobeys announcement. I know that as a former MLA, and I took care of 11 of those remote flying communities, and myself being from one of them. I'm so glad that other avenues are being explored. I would really like to hear more. So if I could reach out to you, I'd really like that.
sure, I'd love that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions for Randy? And Randy, thank you for the great presentation. It's really in my interest area. I've worked with Penna Oil in the past and got to know about winter roads. I think you said how hard it is to carry oil. You don't want to drive a truck carrying oil in winter roads. And Penna Oil is exactly doing that. So I feel the challenge they are into. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can't
So-
imagine how they do it.
Yeah, and we have a question from Esnat. What alternatives to traditional winter roads can be developed to maintain connectivity for remote regions? Are there any existing technologies or innovations that are being explored to help? What are your thoughts?
Well, that's really the sad part, is that there really isn't a lot of thought being given to this. This is why I'm so happy hanging out with Barry, because Barry's got this airship idea that he's been, forgive me, Barry, floating around for years and hasn't been given the attention that he deserves. The reason I stay friends with Barry is that he's one of the only people that I know that's actually thinking about a solution to this problem.
Randy, if I could comment also, I was really quite, I guess you could say, shocked to hear that insurance is becoming an issue. And it's not like insurance is, climate change. We're seeing problems of insurance in places that are damaged, and insurance even for bringing in ships to churches. It seems like insurance industry is a major contributor to this issue. Not that they're to blame. Obviously, they have to be able to support themselves too, but that's an interesting aspect. That's the first time I've heard that.
Yeah, this is an issue brought up by Deutsche Bank, actually, when I met with them about your airship investment. They said, yeah, your winter roads are going to end far sooner than you think, because the insurance companies simply won't cover the trucks.
Can I just jump in, Randy? Because that's my reality right now, Barry. I had 5 major Canadian insurance companies terminate our insurance, and we had to go to the pirates to get insurance to be able to do this. My own personal vehicle was $29,000 a year for a pickup truck because I went on ice roads. So yes, insurance is number 3.
I would also like to add, being an entrepreneur in the north, I went through hundreds of calls to try and find somebody to insure my laundromat that I had going up there. My grandfather owned a lodge, and he couldn't find anybody to insure his business. And so when it went up, there was nothing we could do. We just had to take that loss. And so, and us trying to, like, leadership in the area trying to start a business, it's so difficult because, again, there's no insurance. There's nobody that wants to take on insurance for us. And so it adds to everything.
Certainly a
Yes.
new dimension, what we're dealing with.
Yeah, something I hardly thought about, thinking about transportation to the north. So this is really good information for us to work with. And any more questions for Randy? Okay, if not, thank you very much, Randy, again for your presentation and for being here with us on the Fields of Wheels conference. And moving on, we next have the Vice President of Permit Aviation, Carlos Castillo. So Carlos, I will let you introduce yourself briefly for our audience, if you don't mind, and it's over to you.
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Barry, for the invite. We had a good conversation a couple of weeks ago, and he wanted me to speak a little bit more about air transportation, which is, as you have heard, a big component of the cost associated to the food in the north. I put together a very minimalistic presentation. Let me try to put it up on the screen, just to help us navigate through the topics that I would like to touch on. So just bear with me for a second. We tried this earlier today and I think it worked out well. So I hope that you can see this.
It's fine.
Okay, perfect. So a little bit about myself and what we do at Perimeter Aviation. I've been with the company for about 20 years. We serve 22 flying communities in northern Manitoba and Ontario. You have heard about Perimeter in previous speakers already. We are pretty much exclusively serving isolated communities with bases out of Winnipeg and Thompson. Also Sea Lookout and Bearskin Airline is part of our family as well, part of our brand out of Thunder Bay. We do have daily flights to pretty much all communities in northern Manitoba. In some occasions, multiple flights per day. And we operate currently mostly Dash 8 aircraft, which are 37-seat configuration with a cargo hold in the back, Dash 8s 100, also Dash 8s 300s that can carry up to 45 passengers with a cargo hold in the back as well. In previous years, we've been in business for over 60 years, and in previous years before the Dash 8s, which were introduced in our system about 12, 15 years ago, the Metro aircraft used to be the backbone of our operation. Metro is a smaller turboprop aircraft, about 14, 16 seats, and a cargo hold in the back. Fairly fast, but it has been coming to an age, and it has been also subject to certain restrictions and performance limitations over the years. So we are replacing that platform with the Dash 8. We've been doing so for the last 12 years. I think it's important to also preface my presentation a little bit with very basic airline economics. And we can't try to cover everything in one single presentation in a few minutes. It's a very complex topic. So I'll try to summarize it as much as I can. And basically for an airline, and specifically for a northern airline, space and weight are key factors. The speed of the aircraft is also a huge component that drives a lot of the economics on what we do, the goods, the people that we're flying. As I mentioned, we have Dash 8s 100 with 37 seats, also Dash 8s with 45 seats. These aircraft are not the fastest, but they are relatively good, very good for, my apologies, I think I just pressed the wrong button here. Very good platform for the conditions that we operate in, which are very short runways. We're going to touch a little bit more on that later in this presentation. And the fuel consumption also compared to other platforms is relatively good. The capacity they have in the back, we made some modifications to these platforms to allow for more cargo hold. Our business model is predicated on the ability to move passengers and cargo at the same time, minimizing the empty legs as much as possible, maximizing economies of scale as well, considering that it's a relatively small market compared to other locations in the country. So our way to maximize the space and the weight on this aircraft has always been a key driver on our business. That's why the Metro was such a successful platform back in the day. And now that the Dash is replacing that platform, it's kind of becoming a good replacement in many aspects, but also a challenge on smaller markets. Now, distance as a driver to cost in aviation presents a challenge in Northern Canada in small or short segments that we fly, because we have to, you can imagine a flight from Winnipeg to Garden Hill, for example, is about an hour, just over an hour. And I apologize, I'm a little bit sick, so I may lose my voice at some point. But we have that flight going 3 times a day. There's about an hour, 1.2 hours of a flight. That flight may be stopping in a community or two, St. Therese as well. So it's a common combination. And again, we're trying to do this to fill up the airplane as much as possible with passengers and cargo. Those short distances, relative short distances, require the airplane to go through takeoff and climb more often, and they're not so much into the cruise phase of the flight, which is the most fuel efficient segment of the flight. And normally what you see is that a short distance route has higher cost than a long distance route, at least on the variable costs. Now, the market size and the economies of scale is another big factor. The communities that we're serving are relatively small in size compared to other southern markets. Travel patterns have changed substantially since the pandemic. I think everybody knows the impact of the pandemic across the industry are still felt today. Volumes have not returned to pre-pandemic levels, but they are trending in the positive way. And this applies both to passenger and cargo. So we need to become very efficient in how we're flying. In the past, before the pandemic, our route network was somehow different. Our schedule was quite a bit different than what we have today, because we were forced to be more efficient in an effort to counter some of the challenges that I'm going to discuss next, and basically remain as efficient as possible. That helps keeping the costs down. So going to the challenges, one of them is, for example, the small markets and the vast distances that we need to cover. I just touched on that. More stops are needed, either for fuel or to fill up the aircraft. And then those additional stops require more takeoffs, more climbing, less time at cruise altitude, which is a factor to increase costs. Fuel prices. Fuel prices can contribute 30–40% of the cost for an airline. It is a substantial driver. The other one being labor, also around 30% mark. Since before the pandemic, we have seen fuel prices rise substantially. You have talked a little bit about carbon tax that has had also a substantial impact on these prices, 10 to 20%, according to some analysts, as the carbon tax continue to go up until reaching its peak in 2030. And these I'm just noticing that I'm actually talking about fuel prices on the next slide. My apologies. Just if somebody can let me know, what are you seeing on the screen? What's showing up as a header?
We're seeing the fuel
Oil
prices. now.
prices.
Fuel prices.
Okay. So I'll get to the previous one, which was the weather conditions. There you go, weather conditions. Now, weather and combined with the lack of infrastructure in northern airports, specifically as to related to the weather reporting, weather stations, manpower. Weather, it's a huge component to increase costs related to flight misses. We're flying up to the community, we're shooting an approach, we can't land, we don't see the field at the minimum altitude, we need to come back. Those instances occur quite often in northern flying, more so than southern flying by a substantial margin. The cancellations are also a big factor because of the poor weather. In some instances, the weather may not be as poor, but the lack of reporting doesn't give us the required level of confidence to send a flight just to see that flight miss. There's a chance that they could land, but we don't have the accurate weather reporting necessary, especially during the shoulder seasons. We're right now just coming out of a couple of weeks of many cancellations, and that breaks your efficiencies in the schedule. Everything that we do in aviation is as efficient as we can. All the flights are staggered in a way to become as efficient as we can, so we can launch mission after next. Any delay will have an impact at the end of the day, and the possibility of a cancellation impacting customers, obviously, the delivery of the goods and the efficiency of the operation. Now, maintenance costs are a substantial driver as well. The weather, the runway conditions that we operate in, these are mostly gravel runways, short gravel runways. So wear and tear is much higher than what you may see in operations going from asphalt to asphalt. It's just natural in the conditions that we're operating. The extreme weather changes, the conditions in the north that required obviously safe operations, de-icing, additional costs for that are substantial because there's no equipment available in any of these communities in the north. We, the operators, need to put those in place. There's no redundancy in the sense that there's no availability for maintenance in any of the communities in the north. We need to provide that from our main bases. So if there's a mechanical situation in one of the communities, which is not uncommon, in a safe operation, we need to dispatch an airplane and mechanics with parts to fix those airplanes up north, where in the south, normally you have other options, other companies that provide that service in multiple airports, larger airports. The exchange rate as well, the Canadian exchange rate, the Canadian dollar weakening, it has a big impact on the costs as well. Most of these parts that we're purchasing are traded in American dollars. In most of the suppliers are in the US, and even if they're in Canada, they are priced in American dollars. So that has a big impact as well. The regulatory requirements, they have changed as well over the years. Stringent regulations like reduced working hours for pilots, for example, comes to mind. About 2017, Transport Canada started a change that to address pilot fatigue, especially those pilots that were flying between time zones, large stage lengths, yearly departures. A valid point, mostly applicable to large national carriers, but it basically came to effect for all carriers by 2019, just before the pandemic. And the consequences of that are basically that to do the same amount of flying that we were doing before that legislation came to force, we now require 20% more pilots to do the same amount of work. It basically reduced for everybody the amount of hours that each pilot could fly in a day or could work in a day. Their shift was reduced from what we were, for example, able to do in a 14-hour day shift period. Those were reduced to 11 hours, 10 hours, and even depending on some cases, depending on how many legs they do in a day or how early they start in the day, it could be reduced up to 9 and 8 hours if they travel certain time zones and I'm going to the extreme case of the change that occurred. So we need 20% more pilots to do what we were able to do before. And this is coming at a time that there's a pilot shortage, but there's a slide for that on its own. And then also additional changes that occurred in respect to passenger protection also came into effect in 2020, if I remember correctly, in that required airlines to cover for compensation related to operational delays. There are some exemptions regarding to safety-related events, and there's some components of safety that could be maintenance, weather, airport-related. However, at perimeter, understanding the commitment that we have with our customers in the north, we cover compensation for pretty much all events that could occur. But having Transport Canada implement, or the Canadian Transportation Agency implement these new regulations that were substantially higher than what was practiced by the industry before, also contributed and contributes today to a higher cost of travel. I touched very briefly before on the limited infrastructure, the short runways, obviously, that limits the payloads that we're able to carry, the poor runway conditions, the increased wear and tear, with unscheduled maintenance events, especially this is a combination of bad weather and also that limited infrastructure. But a good example would be this fall season in the north. Runways are usually quite soft during this time. Depends on how much precipitation there could have been, what the temperature range could be, and we saw a large amount of prop damage caused by, again, soft runways picking up some of these gravel as the aircraft are trying to turn, and they need a little bit more power so they don't get stuck on the runway. We had events of aircraft stuck on the runway once they land. These runways are probably what we have noticed. They're well maintained. The staff are doing as much as they can to maintain those runways properly and plow them and keep them as dry as possible, snow free. But they're aging. These are airports that are aging quite a bit. Some of them were built in the 50s, and they were built for different platforms, for different aircraft, much lighter than the ones that we're sending today, that the market demands to send today, or simply there's no other platform available. So the drainage system is not built for that type of aircraft that we're sending. These runways are basically not built for that. The airport terminal, the ramp area, they're all, again, built many, many years ago based on much smaller and lighter aircraft. So we're at a higher risk of getting stuck when the runways are soft, what we call soft runways. Other areas that impact food security, and I wanted to mention too, it's the lack of warehousing, storage space, for example, at these airports. Air operators have to bring and put infrastructure in place so we can store frozen product, fresh product, dry product in a secured, clean environment. Many times working with power that's not very stable as well. So that increases some of that wear and tear in some of those units as well. So small details, but I just want to mention them as they compound and do make a difference. So I touched before on the pilot and pilot shortages, but there's also general labor in total. I mentioned it that it's about 30% of our operation, it's labor. And on the pilot shortage side of things, when there's not enough pilots to do what we need to do, and there's less time that they can fly, so we need to do a couple of things. We need to reduce our frequency, become more efficient in our scheduling, and we need to be more attractive to these pilots so they can come and work for us. So that's what we did. That's what we had to do in last year, 2023. And our pilot salaries just skyrocketed because that's what the industry is doing. Everybody's fighting for these pilots, and we want to make sure that we retain and hire the best that are out there. Luckily, things are improving in this area, but this is probably the biggest challenge that we're currently facing still. It doesn't allow us to have the backup, the spare coverage that we normally have in the event of somebody calling in sick. In the past, we were able to go ahead and put another pilot that we had on reserve and then continue with that mission, minimizing some of the delays and cancellations. However, nowadays, pilot calls in sick and we're probably going to be canceling a flight or two because of that. Not a lot of options to recover. So yeah, we're trying to be efficient, but not able to do it when there's such a shortage. And the same with other areas. Maintenance was one of them. It has improved. General labor, northern staff at the communities as well. It's a continuous effort to maintain, retain a lot of this staff and present a good offering for them to come and work for an airline. There are substantial third-party costs and fees as well. I think everybody probably knows that airports charge their fees to park, to land, to use any of the services that they have. There are navigation fees, insurance. We have talked about insurance in some of the other presenters as well, also impacting us substantially. Professional fees, and these are going up by much larger percentages than what we have seen accumulated CPI since the pandemic is of 23 to 25% or so. We're seeing increases of, since the pandemic, 2019, 40% in many areas. So we understand it's an essential service. There are a lot of political pressures. We're trying to maintain an efficient operation, but again, the nature of the service and the political pressures to ensure there's a certain frequency, and even though it may not be economically viable or other scheduling requirements are also factors that make it a little bit more difficult for an airline to become more cost effective. The amount of, for example, baggage that we allow passengers to carry, it is quite important, essential for our passengers. We would love to have the ability to provide more baggage space for our passengers. However, there's just not enough room on this aircraft to take it all. Community members are coming to Winnipeg or Thompson, Sioux Lookout, Thunder Bay, you name it, and they're taking an opportunity to purchase goods that are extremely expensive for them up north. And we obviously want to facilitate the transportation of that back to their community. So we have tried a couple of ways, especially in the last couple of years, to offer some service that allow them to bring some of those goods back at a lower rate, not necessarily with them on the same flight, because like I said, it's substantial, the amount of goods that they bring, much more than other traditional airlines. We did a study and we saw on average, our passengers were bringing 6 to 8 items, large items per passenger before some of the changes that we had to put in place last year. So it is important to continue providing this service reliably, safely. And in doing so, we try to, maintain a level of efficiency while at the same time maintaining comfort, frequency, etc. I think to summarize, we obviously air transportation, it's very expensive. I hope that this brief presentation can give you high-level information on some of the factors that are driving some of those costs and how they are different for northern travel, which also has to be there's a difference between the northern Manitoba, northern Ontario air travel versus Arctic travel as well. There are some nuances that drive efficiencies and costs in a different way. But yeah, very high operational costs with small markets and high risks at the same time. But we, northern operators, I think there are a multiple number of companies serving the north nowadays that are all committed, trying to find ways to keep these costs down. I'm going to take the opportunity to connect with everybody that has presented so far and continue looking for ways to partner and bring more affordable foods to the north where it's needed. There are a couple of initiatives already in place with Manitoba Harvest, for example. Also, others that are going to be announced soon. I'm not going to be able to mention details yet, but it's an effort that's continuous and is involving multiple partners. We need to be all working together to accomplish what we all want. So thank you again. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
All right. Thank you, Carlos. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat. So I'll read out the first one. Do the feds own the remote airports or are they community run? That's the first one.
Yeah, they're owned by the feds. No, all the northern airports are owned by the federal government, provincial government in Manitoba, sorry, Ontario government in Ontario as well, and they're funded through not very well through federal funding. That hasn't changed in over a couple of decades, actually, through ACAPs. That's quite a complex topic of its own.
And continuing to the second one, the same question is from Chris. Would it be viable to deliver warehouse assembly into these remote communities to enhance the airports for food warehousing? Any thoughts on that?
Yes. So let me just try to fully understand. We're talking about the opportunity to use the delivery drones. Is that the question?
No, the previous one. It's a continuation of the
Oh,
remote airports?
warehouse assembly into these remote communities to enhance the airports. Yes, for sure. There's infrastructure is needed on multiple levels. The storage, I think may have been Jennifer that mentioned the couple of the airports in Garden Hill, St. Teresa Point, for example. You have to cross the lake to go to the airport. That presents a big problem for regular customers, even to just go ahead and retrieve their goods or mail or you name it. And there's just not enough space to house any of these goods. We put ourselves some of that infrastructure in place, but it's just not sufficient in many areas. So for sure, yes. The answer, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, the next question, it's a common topic that I've seen throughout a lot of conferences in the past. It's about asking about delivery drones being used for northern communities. Any insights on that or your thoughts?
A couple of years ago, we did an analysis just to understand what options we had to overcome, especially this water crossing problem. So
leave
it
at
is
2:45.
probably
Okay, so you can write it
It
right
wa-
at the beginning. We're writing it instantly as we start. It's 10 minutes.
Can I request
Sorry, I don't-
Miranda to mute, please?
So there were a couple of technologies that were in coming out. This is probably more than 2 years ago. It's COVID years, my apologies, but this is probably before COVID even. There are no physical addresses in northern Manitoba, but Google was coming up with this grid system. I can't remember the name, but it presents an opportunity to do delivery that way. But we go back to, again, some of the regulatory challenges. Having drones at the northern airports are not something that is pretty viable, very viable with current regulations, where we'll be operating out of an airport. There will be some regulatory items that need to be addressed there. And then the infrastructure, the ability to house all these more efficiently needs to be looked into. However, I think it's a viable option considering the vast area to cover and the terrain that we're operating in as well.
Okay, one last question. Which situation more commonly results in more revenue for the airline per space, an airline ticket, and average 6 to 8 large items, or a similar amount of cargo without any passengers?
In our case, a good ratio of passengers and heavy items in the back, not a very large amount. Weight, if we can maximize the weight, the payload available on the aircraft by weight, that's the best case scenario. Cargo on its own, the aircraft that we operate are not very good cargo haulers exclusively. Our planes are, again, passenger and cargo in the back. But if you go ahead and use, and we have other sister companies or colleagues operating cargo only aircraft, your rate per pound needs to be higher in order to make that viable, economically viable.
Okay. Thank you. So one last thing. This question is from Barry. Any estimate on how much total costs of aviation to the north has increased within the past 3 to 4 years?
Well, I've seen numbers in the 40% mark. For us, in particular, I think we're about 20% in our prices. Now, our costs have gone up much higher than that, but we've been able to offset by becoming more efficient in many areas.
Okay. Thank you, Carlos, for the great presentation. And I think
Thank
now
you.
it's time to go for our next presentation, which is by Ross Prentice. So let me briefly introduce Ross to all of you. So Ross is based in Winnipeg, Manitoba, is a logistics and transportation expert with over 20 years of experience. He holds a professional designation in logistics from the University of Manitoba. In 2018, Ross became the CEO of Beyond Aircraft Systems International, a company dedicated to developing airship technology for sustainable transportation in northern regions. Prior to this role, he contributed to BASI in advisory and volunteer capacities. He's had a lifelong interest in cargo airship, of course, influenced in a part by his family background. So Ross is also a co-founder and chief operating officer of EvoTrucks, a freight matching platform connecting shippers and carriers directly for increased efficiency and value. His extensive industry experience enhances quality and transparency in freight logistics. Through his leadership roles at BASI and EvoTrucks, Ross continues to contribute to advancements in transportation technology, aiming to create more accessible and efficient logistics solutions to underserved regions. Ross, it's over to you.
So to make sure everybody can hear me.
We can.
Perfect. Okay. I'm going to share my screen here. I've got a presentation prepared. Everybody can see that. Good.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So again, as Narendra mentioned, I'm Ross Prentice for BASI, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to discuss an important topic for the future of Canada's North, cargo airship transportation systems. Airships have been around for over a century, but they've never actually had a major role in cargo transportation. So this is partly due to the nature of the way that they need to be handled. So developing a safe and efficient method for ground handling and ballast transfer is a critical element for success. So before we really dive into how airships can help, we need to consider the current situation in the North. We've heard from several presenters about elements of this. The lack of relative connected transportation offers limited opportunities, and as a result, jobs up there are very scarce. As a result, government subsidies tend to be the main source of income for a lot of communities, and they face tremendous challenges that are just not a reality for us in the South at all. As we heard from Randy Jenkins, the winter road network is threatened, and in the past 20 years, we've actually lost half of the available use, and more in some cases for more of the southern communities. It's not as bad further north, but it's getting progressively a lot worse in southern regions, where we get sections of the winter that are warmer, and as a result of that, the ability to bring in or to put in the roads tends to be a little more difficult in general, and the consistency of the temperature creates problems with being able to have the roads in for periods of time. You'll get times where you get a strange amount of warm weather that will actually create problems for the road. You have to have brief closures or limits on weight, and this really affects things in terms of how many communities can receive the things they need. A lot of these communities in general rely on winter roads to receive the majority of their supplies for the year. So when the roads don't go in or are not available in a consistent way, the communities suffer for that. And then you can deliver a certain amount of the freight by airplane to offset that, but the additional cost that adds is tremendous. And as a result as well, too, airplanes can only carry certain things. So that also presents a considerable risk. So ultimately, this results in, but isn't limited to, very, very high costs for food, even subsidized costs. The example that's shown here with the milk, that's about a 5 or 6 year old picture. It's very, very likely that the costs have gone up dramatically from that even. And even that is just, it blows my mind to see that cost. This, as a result, tends to contribute to health problems and malnutrition, as healthy food is expensive or not even available in some cases. And then as well too, there are other issues that develop. Housing has mold problems and overcrowding, structural issues, and getting supplies in to repair them, or even people to fix those problems creates a tremendous cost and challenge. And then, of course, this also tends to develop into or positions social problems and high rates of other concerns that are associated as a result of just the nature of that circumstance. And all of these problems could be addressed by having a consistent and affordable transportation solution. So airplanes, they provide a vital service to the north, but the cost is very, very high. Carlos, the previous presenter, covered many of the reasons for this. I'll just share a very brief excerpt I had from a conversation with another Northern Air operator. They had told me that essentially from a maintenance standpoint, they count every landing as 2 landings for the nature of the runways, the conditions. When the propellers are coming in and they're still spinning up, you've got gravel hitting them, and the premature wear on the airplanes as a result of landing on runway conditions that are just, they're not what we have here in the South. They're very bumpy, and it creates a lot of premature damage to the airplanes that otherwise wouldn't occur. The introduction of airship services for cargo would help to bring down costs considerably, and would also provide a year-round opportunity to deliver bulky or oversized cargo. Airships have very large cargo bays, and they have the ability to carry slung cargo. So ultimately, they can handle basically anything that you could put on an over-the-road truck, and essentially actually a lot more things as well. So cargo airships are currently being developed all over the world. There's very strong support over in Europe at the moment. They're doing a lot to help to bring things up and get things going there. The airships that are shown in the pictures here range from between 10 and 100 tons of lifting capacity. There's multiple countries working on this with varied design ideas, and there are a lot of innovators out there that are really trying to bring this technology back into service. The 2 closest are the ones here at the top, hybrid air vehicles. The Airlander, that's actually a production vehicle at this time, and they're working through to actually mass produce elements of it. It is, however, a blimp design, which I won't get too far into, but it would face tremendous challenges in our cold weather climates. There's also LTA research down in the USA, and they're actually producing what's shown here is actually their rigid airship design. And that's getting closer to a time when they'll be looking to produce it, but still in a concept phase at this time in terms of it has not been yet certified. BASI also has some designs for multiple sizes of cargo airships, but in the interest of bringing forward a solution to Canada's north sooner, we're working with other airship companies that are closer to flying prototypes and actually working hard on developing our ground handling technology at this time. And I'll get into that in a little bit. So every mode of cargo transportation relies on systems and infrastructure to be able to operate effectively. This gives the opportunity to be safe, profitable, and reliable, which is incredibly important if you want to try to do anything relating to cargo. Airships are an emerging option as a cargo transporter. So they need support, and that support needs to be appropriate and needs to be subsidized properly. Airline operators don't build airports, and transport truck carriers don't build highways. In the same way, airship operators are going to need handling facilities that are properly managed and handled by government, which requires a lot of support and involvement that at this time hasn't gotten to where it needs to be. But I have faith that we're going to get there with it. So we're not really used to seeing airships around, so it's maybe a little difficult to understand their scale. This example here is our potential 30-ton airship. So about 187 meters long. It's a fairly significant aircraft. The largest aircraft in the world, the Antonov AN-225, It would basically be about the length of 2 of those, or maybe a little bit more. Perhaps maybe a more familiar vehicle, the school buses. There about 13 buses parked end to end to get an equivalent distance, something in the neighborhood of almost 2 football fields long. This immense size and buoyant property requires that these aircraft be handled very differently than what we would see for a traditional aircraft. And as a result, we've had a lot of time to think about this, and we've developed what we call the Buoyant Aircraft Rotating Depot, or BARD for short. It's a large-scale rotating turntable surface that's appropriate for handling the airship and allowing it to be reballasted, to exchange cargo, to refuel it, and conduct any kind of inspections and sort of things that need to be done to ensure its safety. This very specially designed infrastructure allows for the airship to be predictably handled in a variety of different conditions, and it allows it to be able to turn and move with the wind as necessary without risking the people that are working on transferring the cargo or making adjustments in terms of the ballast or refueling. This type of fixed infrastructure also allows for the potential development of autonomous operations, because these will be fixed points of pickup for delivery. So I've got a brief video here. If I just have a moment here to adjust the speed of it, because it otherwise clips along quite quickly. So this just gives an indication of how we would go about preparing or putting a BARD on a prepared site. So we would start by installing pins and piling to get everything set and level, followed by electrical connections and service buildings to be able to ensure we've got the required things needed that way. A water ballast, containment, and then fuel supply areas would be assembled and set up. Lines run to the middle of the BARD area where we'll be able to make that work. Then skirting and ramp can be installed, allowing us to be able to set the nature of the space, adding wind sensors, which will be necessary to be able to control the surface. Then if we have size and scope needs, installing certain amounts of warehousing and outbuildings to be able to allow for cargo to be stored, installing the turning motor and surface, and allowing us to be able to then deliver with airships. Let's rerun again. There we go. So in transportation, safety is paramount. The use of a BARD system would allow cargo to be safely transferred while allowing the ship to rotate as needed when the wind adjusts. This will give us a chance to be able to have greater utilization, because we can offload, unload in more adverse conditions than what we would otherwise be able to. This would allow turnaround times to be reduced, and so as a result, we'd be able to keep schedule. This is, as Carlos mentioned in his previous presentation, very, very important in aviation. In order to be able to get the maximum out of these things, you need to have as much utilization as you possibly can within the time that you've got. You can't have the weather messing with you. The BARD also has a minimal footprint. I'll get to, I have another slide about that in general, but it ultimately absorbs less space than traditional methods of handling airships. The typical way of managing that is the airship is held by the nose and that on a mast, and it is allowed to move and swing in all different directions as necessary. In the case of the BARD, we're securing it from the middle, and then we rotate it around as necessary, so it takes up a lot less space. And then relative to the value of the aircraft itself, the BARD is a really minimal cost. It's not as expensive as it would seem for what it is, and ultimately compared to the cost of the machines that will be operating on it, it's actually quite minimal. So we did some case studies, several of them actually. We kind of come to some very interesting conclusions about the nature of where the costs will be for an airship system. The BARD part of it is actually fairly minimal. And even if we dramatically increase the cost of the BARD, which we placed the initial design at about $3 million per. If we move that up to even more than double at 7 million, it still only makes about 12% total system cost. So comparative to the actual value of the airship itself, the cost is quite minimal for the tremendous benefits and protections that it offers. As I was mentioning earlier, it's the area required to be able to support an airship. If you have a mast design, you have to account for the airship swinging all the way along in any direction from that center pivot point. So as you get larger aircraft, that distance increases quite exponentially. And as you can see, even just with a 250-meter airship, so this would be a little larger than the 30-ton one that I mentioned earlier and showed the example of. The considerable amount of area that is required comparative with the mast technology versus the BARD is quite notable. So it's a lot safer and more efficient and saves a lot of space. This actually allows for it to be potentially installed at near airports or nearby fixed existing infrastructure. It limits land clearing and the amount of space that's actually required to hold on to that tech. It's also assembled in modules, similar to sort of pie pieces essentially. So those could be rehomed or removed should circumstances change. This is especially important for circumstances like someone that's going to produce a remote mine somewhere. You don't have a stranded asset of a road or the requirements to remediate that space that's damaged by the input of a road. Simply remove the BARD as necessary and do the remediation of the land that was taken at that point. So since 2011, BASI has been researching and developing technology to enable the creation of a cargo airship system to serve the North. The BARD is a critical missing piece of this that allows for us to be able to provide access to rural communities using airships. You can see in the chart that I've developed, or the example I developed here, that effectively we would consolidate all sorts of different resources from food suppliers, truckload and less than truckload items, and bring them to a space where they would then be transferred over to the BARD to be able to move over into the airship, flown over to the remote community and transferred on a similar BARD in that space. And then from there moved to community warehouses and then distributed from those two community homes and stores. This would allow, through a consistent, affordable transportation solution, all year round deliveries of a variety of different cargo. The associated services and all of these pieces would be potentials for job creation and development opportunities. As the connected transportation is something that's more available, this also allows for business development in the North as well too, because having consistent transportation would allow for a lot more opportunities than what we have today. So I've got a couple of examples for here in Manitoba. First one here is the distribution that would operate out of Norway House, where we've got about an 800-kilometer drive from Winnipeg to get to Norway House. And then from there are about 7 that I could see, but there may be others within about 300 kilometers that would be able to be served from that space. It would allow for bulk buying of food or other items to be able to have communities share in the benefits of being able to have these things brought in and distributed from that one location. And this is also an ideal location, as we see, for a potential pilot project to be able to test this technology. The second example, we've got Thompson, Manitoba. There are about 16 communities that we could see within around 300 kilometers range that would allow for us to be able to serve. There are in this map as well too an additional 10 communities or so that fall into about a 500 kilometer range. This is for a 30-ton airship, a little bit less efficient, but still within potential range. And of course, as airship sizes increase, the chances of being able to make a little longer distances are also better. Just to be clear about that, it's not necessarily that the airship can't travel that distance. It's more that the economics of it are better for a larger airship with at longer range. In the case of Thompson, goods could be sent in via road or rail, transshipped to airships, and then flown about 300 kilometers or so average distance to a variety of different communities within the target range. Thompson's also a cold weather testing hub and a space that we see as a major opportunity for airships to be tested and to have the facilities for repair and other things. There's some strong support there, and we see a lot of that. And then as well, the possibility of remote mining opportunities. There's a lot of resources that are up in that region that are currently not accessible. There'd be a chance to be able to take some good benefits from that while offering some very important elements to the communities in those regions. The other element of this as well too is that in addition to the potential for food security advantages, this area is heavy chronic shortage of housing. We're seeing at this point in time 4.3 persons per dwelling in remote communities in this region. This is considerably higher than the national average of 2.5. The 2023 census that we looked through for this identified that we need nearly 4,000 new houses to replace aging supply in this region alone. So there's a considerable need, and certainly airships could help to solve that. So there's a national policy for critical minerals, and this is presenting a significant opportunity for us to help further reduce freight rates for northbound goods. Typically, mines ship more than double the weight and concentrate south versus the weight of mining supplies they need sent north. This would present an opportunity for empty northbound ships to carry food, building materials, other goods to nearby remote communities, load up on ballast, proceed to the mine, empty the ballast, and then collect loads of concentrate and bring them south. If this was coordinated properly, the northern communities could then see backhaul rates for this. As a result, pay significant amount less, and they wouldn't have those round trip costs that would exist as a result of just it being empty or a ballasted airship coming back. So we've, over the course of time, made some considerable progress in the last couple of years, especially in developing the BARD technology. We've built some smaller scale desktop models and versions and done some tests with them to be able to understand the controls and how we might operate using sensors. As I showed you in the slide video, we looked at using piles to ensure leveling for the larger version of the turntable. The research we've done shows that it's critical for the turntable to be level in order to be able to have consistent operations with it. As well, we want levels because it's a lot more difficult to drive around on it with the forklift as well too if it's not. So we've worked through some of and developed the connections that are needed to be able to understand how to use wind sensors to be able to appropriately adjust the turntable where needed. Winds will change and shift often, and for our part of it, understanding those changes and being able to make appropriate adjustments is a critical element to being able to have these airships under proper control. The combination of these things positions us now to take the next steps needed in development to scale up the technology and start using it out in the real world. So at this time, we've reached TRL 6. So we've got technology demonstration. We're looking to conduct trials now with a scaled up outdoor pilot project. We've been in talks with government and communities to determine the location of that pilot project. It would allow for 2 prototype BARD devices, and then likely an advertising blimp or similar sized smaller aircraft to prove out the technology and to help us to be able to have an example for government to see before moving to full scale. So from that, capital investment and development of government support are really critical to moving the project forward. And we're underway on both of those things at this time. So as this is ultimately a conference dedicated to agricultural development, and I'd be remiss not to provide a final thought regarding the worldwide potential for airships. These are extremely high endurance vehicles. The Graf Zeppelin circumnavigated excuse me, the globe back in 1929. That's almost 100 years ago. They were operating safely at times where airplanes were still very much in question. This is a very proven technology that needs the modern advances that we've seen in other aviation. Using modern cargo airships to transport freight around the world is an important part of our future as I see it. It opens up the potential for new supply chains. They're slower, but a lot cheaper than airplanes to operate. Faster than ships.
Okay,
but still capable of carrying very large volumes of freight, which gives them a unique opportunity to sort of fit in the middle there between airplanes and ships. So the critical missing piece is handling them properly so that we can harness that potential for change. And BASI is well underway on working on that, and hope to have some future developments to share on that very soon. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you all today, and I've now opened the floor to any questions that anybody might have.
All right, thank you, Ross. We do have a couple of questions lined up. So meanwhile, if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. So the first question is, I assume that an airship would bring in the workers and supplies to build a PA installation. Would that take a few trips? That question is coming from Chris.
Right. So I think it's very possible that we would look to bring in the supplies to build the BARD using winter roads. The existing network allows for that to be done, and trucks are actually a very effective way for us to move in the pieces needed to be able to assemble things. The biggest challenge that you encounter with an airship is that you've got a consistent amount of lift that's always present. So if you're carrying an object that's 15 tons, you need to put 15 tons back on immediately, because if you don't, the next stop is the moon. Because you have to make sure that you're transferring that ballast properly. So it's a bit of a challenge to be able to set things up initially using just the airship. However, with that said, there may be opportunities to do parts of that or deliver pieces of it that way. I think the initial installation though would be done using existing infrastructure to get a lot of the parts to where they need to be.
Thank you. And can you account for limitations of extreme weather condition, airship storage at airfields?
So certain amounts of weather could be handled. The extreme limitations on this still need to be fully tested. We've got some good estimates and understandings of relative conditions we'd be able to run in. With that said, the safest place for an airship at any given time is actually up in the air. And it's
about 5.
Okay, so just a heads up.
Mira?
I guess we're doing sex ed is Jim, is that?
okay. Yeah, so to answer the question, effectively the safest place at any time for an airship is actually up in the air. So if weather conditions are not good, you don't want to have that airship anywhere near the ground if you can avoid that. And you can actually get up and over the weather or move to a place or nearby where you're not facing those same conditions. The majority of accidents for airships, the majority of damage to airships actually occurs as a result of them being too close to the ground and the weather basically pushing them onto or over onto the ground. So the best place for you, again, like I say, is to be up in the sky. You don't really want to have them parked on the ground during extreme weather.
Okay. There's one more question. These are very remote areas. Based on your current design, what do you expect would be the time needed to construct a working BART?
So the actual object itself is very straightforward. We've had conversations with a number of fabricators. The actual time to build the object itself is not extreme. I think we would face the challenge of being able to, and this is something that I think a lot of remote community members would be able to relate to, just making sure that we had the ability to bring the products that are necessary in to have them all put together and installed. We've had some conversations with it's Sigfusson is the name of the company. They operate a lot of northern winter roads construction and building each year, and they do a huge amount of the work up in the north. The relative build time would be something in the neighborhood of 3 to 6 months total time between preparing the land and getting everything together. But again, there's some elements in there in terms of an actual time when we're looking at the fabrication of those elements to get everything coordinated and the logistics involved.
All right. Thank you very much, Ross. I think with the time limitations, I will hand over to Barry now to take over. And thank
Sounds
you.
good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Narendra. Michael Birch is our next speaker, but I don't see him logged in yet. Michael, if you're there, could you make yourself known? Michael Birch is the Grand Chief of the Island Lakes area. And maybe while we wait for Michael to come, we can open it up to the previous section for if there are any more questions with Ross or Carlos or Randy.
Well, I see a couple of questions here that are coming up. So in terms of the reception of the Canadian government to airship technology, we've spoken to individual politicians, and the ones we've spoken to seem to be really interested in the potential of it. I think the challenge that we get into with anything with government is that there's a certain amount of siloing that takes place between government departments, and that it ends up being that it's this guy's idea or this one, or talk to these guys, and it ends up with a lot of circling around. So it's very challenging in fashion to get everybody lined up. But I think as the needs are identified to the government by communities, and as we continue to move on this, I believe that the government support will be there. And is the other part here, sorry, the other component of that question was the flight path and air traffic versus normal planes. So airships operate at they actually aren't pressurized. They operate under 10,000 feet for the majority of their operations. As far as their flight paths, there would have to be coordination similar to the way that the regular air traffic is managed. They would fall under the same types of regulations. So they would be managed similarly, while probably not quite the same. The next question I see here was looking at locations. So it's one thing in Canada that we really don't seem to suffer too much about is space. There's lots of room to do a lot of things. I think the challenge we might get into in terms of the locations chosen would be just the preparation of the land needed, and then of course the discussion and all of the things that surround the important elements of consideration when it comes to land use in these communities. We need to speak to community leaders and have understandings of where they would want these things positioned, and as well talking to traditional knowledge keepers to understand where we should put these as well too, in terms of the way that the land actually operates and works. This is a critical element of this, and that these are areas that we just don't really have as much familiarity with, and that we would definitely rely on the traditional knowledge of the people in those areas to help us understand that. Airship storage. Yeah, so I mean, it's something that I think is maybe not necessarily always, well, it's, I think, system or by the nature of things, very, very difficult for understanding, because we just don't see airships, and airships aren't a thing that we have on a regular basis anywhere. Their operations and their storage would be similar to what you see of boats in the ocean. You don't really park a ship up to the dock unless you're going to be doing something to load or unload it. Otherwise, it's out there in the ocean and moving around, and that's very much the way for airships. There isn't we don't want to store them near the ground at all. In fact, actually, as much as possible, we want them to be operating almost continuously. If there was a need to store them, they need tremendous hangars, huge hangars to be able to put them into. These currently do not exist in Canada, and they would also need to be built and then again operated and supported by potentially by government. Right. Okay. Yeah. And then, so then the next question here is about the safest place for an airship during extreme weather. Yeah. So being up in the air is the safest place, because if you get a large gust of wind that throws you, 300 or 400 meters, you don't want that to happen when you're on the ground. You'd rather have that happen where you're not going to hit anything. So being up in the air is the safest place for you during extreme weather. Department of Defense. Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is one of the things that we think is potential of a major use for airships is a combination of surveillance and monitoring. There's a definite desire to work with the Department of National Defense to be able to do that and to help Canada to be able to maintain sovereignty in the North. We want to make sure that we are able to see what's going on up there, and this would give a tremendous opportunity for that, as a large network of airships would be able to present the opportunity to do all sorts of different monitoring for us to be able to protect ourselves as a country. Storage maintenance repair. So yeah, again, we would need a large hangar or large hangars built to be able to manage the maintenance, storage, and repair of airships. But again, I think the storage part, not very much. We don't want to be in there any more than we have to, because if you're in there, you're not flying around and making money. And ultimately, as it comes back to operations, when it comes to aviation, you want to be as efficient as possible in being able to be able to operate as often and as much as you possibly can. Right. Oh yes, training of pilots. Yeah. Yeah, that's another one here that's of interest for sure. That maybe, I'm not sure if that's the group chat that says direct message. So yeah, there's a for pilot training and other things, that's a huge missing gap at the moment that will ultimately need to be filled, and it's we're in a good position, I think, in some ways, in that the Europeans are a few years ahead of us on this and are working hard at developing the technology, and I believe that a lot of what we'll need will probably start from and come from the people that are over in Europe operating now. With that said, we're also familiar with a number of airship pilots around the world that have flown blimps and other different types of airships. Helicopter pilots are also fairly familiar with the nature of being in the air and kind of stopped, so to speak, which that's something for traditional aviation or airline pilots that can be a little concerning. The idea of being up in the air and not moving is kind of unfamiliar to them, so I don't think they like that very much. Operating at northern regional centers. Yes, and yeah, so very much so. Thompson would be an ideal location for airship hangars. We've got some discussions that have been ongoing with that for some time now, with the idea of looking at some of the old trench mines that are there and potentially covering those and using the already dug out space in the ground to be able to provide a large volume of what the hangar would need, and then covering the top of the surface so there wouldn't be nearly as much construction needed to be able to create a fairly large cavity building that would be able to house airships. So there's definitely some plans on that. I think that's the end of the questions at this time.
Well, thank you, Ross. Are there any comments from Carlos or from Randy? Or questions? If not,
Oh,
looks like go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that it's all good here. Great presentation, Ross.
Thank you, Carlos. You as well.
Well, seeing our next speaker is not on until 12:30, it's now 12:11 by my clock, and I don't see Michael Birch, who is, I guess, unfortunately not going to be able to join us. If that's the case, perhaps it's an opportunity to allow everybody to take a quick break if they want to grab a peanut butter sandwich. We don't have lunches at webinars, unfortunately, so this would be your chance to get away. And what we'll do is we'll suspend the presentations and we'll come back at 12:30. So thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you shortly again.